Welcome to Revenue Rehab, your one-stop destination for collective solutions to the biggest challenges faced by marketing leaders today. Now head on over to the couch, make yourself comfortable, and get ready to change the way you approach revenue. Leading your recovery is modern marketer, author, speaker, and chief operating officer at Tegrita, Brandi Starr.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Revenue Rehab. I am your host, Brandi Starr, and we have another amazing episode for you today. I am joined by Jason Kramer. Jason is the founder of Cultivise, a consulting firm that specializes in B2B lead nurturing strategies and technology. With 15 years of experience running a creative agency, Jason identified revenue gaps in marketing and sales funnels for distributors, service providers, marketing agencies, and manufacturers. He launched Cultivise to provide custom solutions and empower businesses to connect prospect and customer data with marketing campaigns and sales team activities. When not strategizing in CRM, he enjoys family time with his wife, 2 kids, and 2 dogs in their lively New York home. Jason, welcome to Revenue Rehab. Your session begins now.
Hey, Brandi. Thank you for having me.
I am excited to talk to you. We've got a lot in common in terms of our backgrounds in marketing. But before we jump into that, I like to break the ice with a little woo-saw moments that I call buzzword banishment. So tell me, what industry buzzword would you like to get rid of forever?
Well, I think it's a non-specific one, but it's unique.
That's an interesting one to get rid of. Why would you like to get rid of unique?
Well, because everybody says they're unique. And so, it's kind of, to me, a vague word, because what does unique really mean? We all try to stand out and be different. And I think that it's used in a very nondescript way, and especially when it comes to content and sales marketing. And I just feel like it's a word that doesn't carry much weight.
Okay. I said, well, at least for this conversation, I can vow to put it in the box and throw away the key. And I won't talk about being unique today. So now that we've gotten that off our chest, tell me, what brings you to Revenue Rehab today?
So what brings me here is you mentioned before about, with the intro, about the gap that I kind of, discovered, not, in any significant way that other people didn't also find that gap. But what brought me here today was really the disjointed connection between marketing and sales teams. Getting those two teams to not only talk together, but to share data for the greater good of the company, right? Which is to gain better quality leads and to drive revenue. That's what it's all about for me.
Awesome. Well, I do know that, there are definitely all sorts of challenges around that. And I know that you have a unique perspective on how those groups can, better utilize CRM to make some of that happen. And so as we go into this discussion, I believe in setting intentions. It gives us focus, it gives us purpose, and most important, it gives our audience an understanding of what they should expect from our discussion. So what would you like people to take away from our conversation today?
I think there's a couple of things. First one, Brandi, is, think about what are you doing today to really reflect on the things you're doing. I always use the example of most smart, well-rounded people would not invest in any type of stock market or investments without looking at the results. So the first thing I would encourage is, if you're investing marketing dollars, whether you're the CMO or you're a business owner listening, whoever it might be, take stake on what are the results we're getting, besides just, the glorified results of how many leads we got, because ultimately that to me isn't really results, right? The second thing I think also is, what are you using in terms of technology for the company, both on the sales and marketing side? What we often see is that a lot of companies will just buy software, and sometimes it's, $50 a month, who cares, or it's thousands of dollars a month, but it goes unchecked. So what I encourage people to do is, if you have access, look at the bank statement or talk to the CFO and say, can I get an itemized list of everything we're spending money on every month? And then figure out, are you actually using that piece of technology or not to value? right?
Yeah,
Because
and I want to start with that second point because
sure,
I do think that that is so important. Because I have seen, we've helped clients do sort of these audits of like, what do they have? How are they using? Are they using it effective? And it always amazes me how often something comes up that most people didn't even know that they had, that, some small group or one person is using. We
yeah,
even had a scenario where we were about to start working with procurement to get approval to purchase a technology. And then they were like, I think this other group already owns it. And turned out they did. And they had like all these licenses that were unused. And it was like, how did we not know? Like, we've been vying for this thing for 2 years and you guys already bought it. And so I do want to talk a little bit about that in terms of like why that is so important. And it's not just an exercise in spend, because I do think that that's what people think about
sure.
is how are we, spending our marketing dollars effectively on the technology. But I'd love to hear your perspective, like more strategically in terms of like really focusing on getting the job of marketing or really the job of revenue done. Like, why is it important to dig in and look at the technologies that you have?
So, I mean, the one thing to me is about the data, right? So, if you have multiple systems and your data is living in multiple places, what we often see in companies, you've probably seen it too, Brandy, is that there's no source of truth, right? So, if they have an ERP system, they have another system for accounting, they have another system for their CRM, and there's multiple sets of data, right, for the same customer in all these different places, and nothing's connected. No one knows what is the most updated information. And so I think that becomes a real hindrance, especially if a companies that deal in any significant volume of data. You're really serving a disservice to not only to your customer, but also to your team, because it's quite embarrassing. Just an example would be if a salesperson was reaching out and didn't know that person just placed an order a month ago. Oh, we're following up, Mr. So and so, Mr. Johnson. We haven't heard from you in a while. What are you talking about? We just placed an order last month, right? It comes across that you're disjointed as a company, and it starts making Mr. Jones start thinking, okay, am I doing business with the right business company? Should I be going to somebody that's more buttoned up? So I think that that's really important is the data aspect. And the other aspect too is just productivity in general. Again, if you have different systems, what we often seen is that you have individuals at that company that are manually exporting data and then updating it to another system, where a sales manager is asking for reports and that report isn't accessible. So what are they doing, Brandy? They're downloading different data from different systems, putting them into a spreadsheet, hoping that everything's correct, hoping there's no human errors, which we both know there always is accidentally. And it takes a lot of time. So if you start thinking about how many hours is my team or my individual person here at the company spending doing all these manual tasks, because of these inefficiencies, and it starts really ramping up, and it's quite alarming.
Yeah, the data piece of it, I definitely would agree. And it seems like there is just this consensus that dirty data or incomplete data is just a thing that is. And, everybody just kind of accepts, like, yeah, I talk to so many people that are like, yeah, our data's not the greatest. And
Mhm.
it just is like, well, are you working on fixing it? And it's like, well, sort of. And there, it's almost like one of those things that you just like that people have just kind of accepted as this is, it is what it is, which is a buzzword that's been banished, I think, a couple times. And so I agree completely with you. Like getting that data to where it flows between systems and you feel like you can actually rely on it and have that source of truth is so important.
Nobody wants to deal with it, really. I mean, it's like telling my 12-year-old daughter, you need to go clean your room, and she's like, "But Dad, I'll do it later. I'll do it later," and she keeps procrastinating, right? Because ultimately she's like, "It's fine. It's my room. What is it? Who cares?" But right? And like, so I mean, it's the same thing with the data. I mean, as silly as it sounds, this company's like, "Yeah, but it's like, what does it matter?" Well, it does matter, and like, but it takes a commitment, right? And that's the biggest thing I think, Brandy, is that for anybody listening today is like you just have to do it. And maybe it's overwhelming, and certainly it can be, but break it into silos. We usually start, okay, well, like we're in August right now. So if we're taking on a new client, we'll say let's go back and, for the last 6 months if we can, or the back until January 1st. And let's look at that data. And then once all that's cleaned up, then we'll go back to 2023. Then we'll go back to 2022 if we can. And that might take some time, but you're breaking it into smaller segments, which is a lot more manageable than trying to look at data for the last 5, 10, 20 years.
Yeah, that is a good point. And so then I want to shift back to the first point that you made in terms of, making the effort to reflect. And I want to, think about it holistically, because I do think that most marketing departments do have some form of reflection where they are looking at data, what's working, what's not. I would say the sales teams do the same. But where I see the breakdown very consistently is in that feedback loop between them. And so I'd love to hear some of your thoughts in terms of what should people be doing to really reflect as a whole revenue team, as opposed to just looking at how, individual efforts are performing.
Yeah. And I would actually, you know, I use the word argue, it's a strong word, but I did say it, is that it's not more about the individual results, it's more about the collective results. So what we look for and we set up with the systems we use for clients is, what is the origins of that lead? Where did they come from? That's to us the critical component at the beginning of the journey. Did they come from a Google ad campaign? If so, which one? Did they come from a trade show? If so, which one? Webinar, etc. Even networking. We have a lot of clients that build business through strategic relationships. So if Jason is sending us a lot of leads, then we might think, oh, Jason's a great referral partner. But if we don't know if those leads are actually closing and how much we're actually generating in terms of revenue, Jason might be sending us really bad leads. And it may not be Jason's fault. And maybe we need to educate Jason on the better types of leads we need. So I think that's the first step is, most CRM systems have a way to track that origin of where did the lead come from. The more sophisticated ones can do it automatically. They can see the referring URL from a LinkedIn post or whatever, and they could tag it as LinkedIn organic. We even often do some things. Another example, I'd use Brandi. We just started working with a roofing company in New Hampshire. Been around for about 20 years. They do a ton of marketing. They're spending 6 figures a year on marketing, but they do a lot, right? They do radio, they do TV, they have lawn signs, they have trucks driving around. And so we went old school. We took QR code technology, right? Simple QR code, and we built a separate QR code for each of their printed materials and digital. So the commercial, for example, for TV, a special QR code shows up in that commercial versus the direct mail campaign. And each one of those goes to a specific landing page. So we're actually able to track where did that lead came from just by them, clicking that QR code. And I think that drawing this back to the marketers, I think a lot of times, unbeknownst to the marketer, or maybe the fault of the marketer because there's so many people at play, they're driving traffic to a homepage or to a specific page, and all of their traffic goes to the same landing page. In some cases, it's very difficult to track the results of that, and it's because they don't have the resources for the web team to build separate pages, or they're not sophisticated enough to do that. But that really makes a difference. And so that's where it starts. But then the other simple part of this, kind of tying in the loop, it's not always about how many interactions did it take to close the deal. Yes, that's important. But it's ultimately, did we close the deal, yes or no? And how much revenue did we generate? And that's really what we tend to look for at a very simple KPI and key performance indicator is the leads, the quality leads, and did the revenue minus the profit margin outweigh the cost to generate those leads?
And so I do agree with you overall that at the end of the day, like that what we're putting in front of our sales team is quality, and that it's converting to, one opportunities at a high percentage is at the end of the day, the only thing that matters. Where I would challenge that and love to hear some of your thoughts is, I hate the attribution from sort of the battle perspective of who gets air quotes credit. But one of the things I think about in making sure that you've got some form of tracking and attribution in place is we need to be able to create that predictive revenue. So we've got to know what channels are actually working so that, or what methods are working so that we can do more of that, and what's
Mhm.
not, so that, we stop spending money and resources there. And so I'd love to hear, because I know you really focus a lot on like the measurement and actionable insights and being able to reflect. When you're working with your clients, what sorts of things are you having them look at and reflect on leading up to those revenue numbers?
So the first thing we're doing is, can we get on the call? So another client we have does pool construction, right? In-ground pools and all sorts of different things. They do a lot of marketing on Facebook. Now, by the way, I know you know this, but for your audience, my company doesn't do any inbound marketing at all, right? We're strictly focused on outbound, and as I say it, your marketing team gets somebody to your front door to knock on your front door. It's my team's job to invite them in, sit them on the couch, get to know them, and build a relationship. Like, that's our role. And so with that, they get a lot of leads from Facebook. And what we've discovered in the short, maybe 2 months we've been working with them, is that they haven't been able to get on the phone with a lot of those people, or they're not getting email responses back. So what does that tell me? I'm not the marketing agency, but it tells me they're not qualified leads, right? So we're looking at how many of those are you actually connecting with. Forget about whether they can afford to work with you, or you even have the product they want. You're not even able to talk to them, right? So
Right.
that tells me right away something needs to be tweaked on the Facebook campaign, because otherwise you're going to keep getting the exact same thing happening, right? The same events over and over. And that's one thing that I think a lot of companies also don't have a very clear defined process. How do you qualify? You mentioned before giving the sales team qualified leads. Well, how do you qualify a lead, right? And so you could qualify leads sometimes by asking certain questions, right, on a form. So you can kind of do it that way. Sometimes it has to be in a conversation, right? Or in simple terms, if you're a company doing loans, right, you could qualify somebody right through an application. Do they meet the terms of what you offer or not, and how you can help them? So I think that's a piece. I think it's two pieces there, like the contact made, to answer your question, Brandy. Are you making contact, and are you able to qualify? And what is your qualifying process, to move them to the next sales process?
Okay.
Yeah.
And that definitely makes sense, because those are, there's all sorts of different words for it, but people call them key moments of truth, and different things along the journey. So it is really focusing, can you get them from one of those moments to the next, and seeing where the breakdown is happening.
Yeah.
Uh,
Absolutely. And then just so it's for terminology, so we call it an MQL, right? So marketing is determining they're a marketing qualified lead, but then the sales team is it's an SQL once it gets to that stage. Now, some companies don't use that terminology, but that's really the ultimate the line in the fence, between going from marketing to sales.
yeah. And that is a good point. No matter what you call it, there is that handoff from one to the other
Mhm.
at whatever phase, and that is important. Um, One of the things that piqued my interest in your bio is you talk about you've got a background in identifying the revenue gaps in the marketing and sales funnels. And so I'd love to hear some of your thoughts around what are the biggest gaps there that you're seeing?
Well, I mean, I think the gap, for the biggest thing, there's a few of them, but this is one of them. So the fact that there's no nurturing, right, being done for so many companies, I think that's a huge missed opportunity. What we often see is that a lot of companies are spending a lot of money upfront and time to get the lead, and they're like, "Yeah, we got a lead. Let's go get that lead. Let's talk to that lead." But if they can't get in touch with the lead, or the lead says, "Hey, sounds good. It sounds interesting. I'm just not ready yet. Call me back in 6 months, or call me back next year." So few companies have a system and a process in place to follow up. And sometimes what happens is that someone might mark their calendar, okay, call Jason back in 6 months. But if there's no contact, and they're like, "Oh, I'm not going to bother Jason. He said to call him back in 6 months." That prospect is probably still shopping around, still doing research. And if somebody else gets in their ear and starts building a rapport with them, you might have lost that deal before you even had a chance to talk to Jason again in 6 months. And so what we often try to do is to nurture and educate, through a systematic process. And what is that systematic process? It's a few things, Brandi. It's a series of emails that we would send out, reminders to the sales team. It's not about asking, are you ready to buy? Are you ready to do a demo? Are you ready for a proposal? It's education. And so if we can go through and we can educate them, by giving the salesperson a automated in part, right, to help them become more efficient, right? So we're going to remind them to do things. But we're getting them to pick up the phone. We're getting them to send an email. Hey, Jason, I was just thinking about you. I saw this article. I thought you might find interesting. And it's an article maybe in an industry publication, not even from the company you work for. And so what we see is if you do all this, Brandi, 63% on average is what the industry stats show, will more likely convert if they've been nurtured through this type of campaign, right? This sequence of events, as if they hadn't. And what we also see too is, which is pretty interesting, when you educate people and you nurture them, they tend to buy more from you because now they actually have seen, oh, well, Jason's company can do a lot more than I realized they can do. Or I might trust Jason's company a little bit more now because they've been helping me all along, right? With all this information, and making me feel comfortable.
Yeah, and you are definitely preaching to the choir there. We talk a lot about deal velocity and deal size with nurture. It's like you are able to move them through that pipeline faster, and you're also able to increase deal size because, there is only so much that a salesperson can say on the phone or in a demo. Whereas that nurture is feeding them more of that information that they need that sales may not cover in those one-to-one conversations. So I definitely love that. And I want to shift back just a little bit because we started talking about technology, and I didn't ask about CRM because I do know that you have some thoughts around ways that companies should be tapping into the features functionality within their CRM to really help more with this process and with that marketing and sales alignment.
Yeah, well, one question I sometimes get asked, and maybe you're going to ask it coming up, but I'll jump into it. People say to me, Jason, is there a CRM that's going to 100% solve all of my issues? And the answer is no. And you and I both know that, but some people don't know that, and they think that there's like some magical unicorn CRM out there that's better than what they have. And it's not so much always about the technology, because the reality is that there's thousands of different pieces of technology out there that you can use for your business. CRM might be a component, and maybe all you need is a CRM, and maybe something for accounting, and then you're set, right? But what we look for is more about identifying a few things. One, the problems that the company is having, the inefficiencies, who in the company is actually going to be using the technology if it's a CRM, and what is the growth project, plans look like for the next 2 to 3 years, right? Because what we sometimes see is that companies will say, you know what, oh, I don't know, that's a good system, it sounds good, but it's expensive and it's more than we need. So what do? They go into something simple that's got the bare bones of what they might need today, and then a year later they are outgrowing that piece of software, and now they got to rebuild everything from scratch and start over and wind up spending more money because they were kind of not looking ahead, into what they're going to need in the future. And so, the big belief I should say I have, Brandi, is that software does not solve most problems. It helps, but you really need a team that understands what the problem is to help you identify and extract all the little components of it, and then what software is going to help drive towards success of reaching those goals to figure out those problems. And the issue, I think that, I keep on saying issue because there are issues. So much software today is all glossy and shiny and cool, right? And you see all these videos and you're like, wow, it's amazing. I can't believe it could do that. But it can't do that out of the box, right? Most systems that are sophisticated, even we talk about drip campaigns or funnel systems that are out there, You have to write the content. You have to design the emails. You have to build the automations. And what we see is a lot of companies struggle where they think that just turning on the key, they're going to be able to go and then everything's going to be all beautiful and, and rainbows. And it doesn't work that way. And
Yeah.
so the outcome we find is that, and this is actually Harvard Business Review did a study, which I absolutely love. It was years ago, but like it always stuck in my head that almost 70% of businesses that try to implement a CRM on their own will completely fail, which I thought was an astonishing number. I mean, when I read that, back then. And the reason is they just don't know anything about the software. And they also don't know how to apply the software to their business needs and their business problem. So they kind of fiddle with it. They kind of pass it off to a junior assistant. Hey, go do this. I'm too busy. You figure it out. And there's really no strategic vision on how that software is going to be used. And so, as you can tell, I'm really passionate about, CRM because it's such a game changer if it's used right. If it's used incorrectly, it's a really costly mistake and it creates a lot of, sometimes, I don't know, bad blood, if you will, in an organization, right? Because sometimes the CRMs are brought in by someone senior level who's like, oh, my buddy over at this company's got this software. I want to get it too because he says it's the best. Well, maybe it's good for him, but it's not good for you, right? That should be the reason why you get it, and I think that sometimes emotions get involved in these decisions, and it pushes you in the wrong direction.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, and I've seen that happen so many times.
Yeah.
And so my last question is, based on time of the year, most of us are going through budget planning for fiscal 25, and the technology budget is always something that is scrutinized year after year because that is always a large number in most companies. And so, as people are thinking about how they, are able to reduce friction, enhance performance, drive more revenue. Any thoughts on what people should be thinking about related to their technology going into, budget planning this year?
Well, yeah. I mean, so the first thing is, what you said before, looking at what you have now, where can you clean house? What can you get rid of that you don't need or that you have two of? Sometimes I'll talk to a company and they have, they'll have like HubSpot and like Zoho. And I'm like, well, why do you have two CRMs? Like, it doesn't make sense. Like, and they don't realize that they both do the same thing, or could do the same thing. So it's, not one is bad or one is better. It's just, why do you have both? So I think looking at what you already have and taking inventory of that, will help determine what you might be able to free up in terms of money for the budget for the next year. And then I think the second thing is outlining, where do you see what are the goals for the business? What are there's marketing goals, there's business goals, there's all different aspects. Maybe you're moving, right? And there's other things, that expenses that are going on. But where's the business going to be a year from now or 6 months from now? And I think if you have a good framework for that and you have an understanding, then you could figure out what you need in terms of technology. And I'll give just a simple example. At Cultivise, we started a brand new social, which your listeners, I'll give it out a little later, but a brand new social media strategy at the end of last year. And so as a result of that, we needed new technology to manage all of that social content and the reporting that we didn't have in place before because we didn't need it, right? So, that technology was a necessity because of the marketing strategy. It's not that we had said, oh, we need this technology first. What are we going to do with it? So it came as a result of some other planning for the business.
Yeah, I agree there. And, I think the other piece, or other two pieces I'd say is once you have tech, there is places where your technology can actually help to drive your strategy. Because I've seen situations where it's like, oh, the tech has this functionality. Here's how we could leverage that to further enhance our strategy.
Mhm.
And then I think the third consideration that I thought about when you were talking as people are going through planning is also thinking about integrations because you talked about the data and how the data connects at the beginning, and what what systems are integrated, how the data is flowing. That is another piece that is important in achieving what you were talking about earlier, in being able to have that clean data, that source of truth. But if things aren't feeding to the source of truth and being normalized, then there's still gaps in your source of truth. uh,
Absolutely, Brandi. I'm glad you brought that up. So that's a big thing which I actually didn't mention, and I'm glad you did, is that if you are looking at any new technology, looking to see what type of integrations are available. And so one quick way to do that, is to go to a website called Zapier, which I know you know, but I'm sure other maybe listeners have heard of. On Zapier, you can do a search for software. They have thousands of pieces of software in that ecosystem. It's a very simple, inexpensive tool to connect one piece of software to another. So if you're looking for software, not saying that promoting Zapier, I have no ties to it, I benefit none the least from it, but it's a very simple tool to use to connect. And so, that's a starting ground, at least, to say, okay, well, if it's part of Zapier, then I have a pretty good feeling that I'm going to be able to use this tool and connect it to other things that I might have.
Yeah, that is a good point, because there's a lot of technologies that have native integrations,
Right.
but Zapier is one that where those native integrations don't exist. Sometimes it's a quick plug and play, depending
Mhm.
on what you're trying to do. Well, awesome. And Jason, talking about our challenges is just the first step, and nothing changes if nothing changes. And so, in traditional therapy, the therapist gives the client some homework. But here at Revenue Rehab, we like to flip that on its head and ask you to give us some homework. So, for those listening, if what you said has resonated with them, what would be your one thing? Where should they start as a first step in moving in the right direction to solve this challenge?
So one thing is it's going to be difficult to answer, Brandy, but I will do my best. Um, would say that the one thing is to take inventory of what you're doing now to track, organize, and to nurture and follow up with your leads. That would be the one thing that I would say. And write that down. All the little pieces of the process, who does what on the team, who's responsible for what software is being used at each individual level, and kind of build like, it doesn't be a fancy flow chart, but build a little like map of how all that is connected. And I think you're going to start finding some areas for improvement if you do that exercise.
Awesome. Well, I love that, like taking stock of what you have, and how it all fits together and how it's being used is so important. Well, Jason, I have enjoyed our discussion, but that's our time for today. But before we go, tell our audience how they can connect with you, and definitely do the shameless plug for Cultivise.
Okay. Thanks, Brandi. Well, you could go to Cultivise website, but the easiest thing to do is go to afterthelead.com. That's afterthelead.com. On there, you'll have my LinkedIn bio. You'll have ability to connect with me on LinkedIn, the ability to schedule a call with me. As you can tell, I love to talk about these things. I'm all about consultative kind of conversations. So happy to talk with any of your listeners. If you have questions, reach out to me. And there's also a playbook on that page, Brandi, for your listeners too, about how to nurture your leads. So it's a playbook I've written that they can download absolutely free, which is a free gift, for the audience and for inviting me as a guest today.
Awesome. Well, we will make sure to link to those, to After the Lead and Cultivise, from the show notes. So wherever you are listening or watching this podcast, check the show notes so that you can connect with Jason. Well, Jason, I have enjoyed our discussion. Thanks so much for joining me here on the couch today.
Thank you, Brandi. It's great to be here.
Awesome. And thanks everyone for joining me. I hope you have enjoyed my conversation with Jason. I can't believe we're at the end. Until next time. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Revenue Rehab with your host, Brandi Starr. Your session is now over, but the learning has just begun. Join our mailing list and catch up on all our shows at revenuerehab.live. We're also on Twitter and Instagram at Revenue Rehab. This concludes this week's session. We'll see you next week.